Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Seth with SethPerler.com. I'm an education coach based out of Boulder, Colorado, an executive function coach, and I help struggling students figure out how to navigate this thing called school, or in this case, education. Because in this video, this is a fantastic topic. I'm going to talk about how what you want to keep if you are homeschooling, what you want to keep in the back of your head as far as executive function. So I'm going to take my time on this video and go into depth. And this video isn't just good for people who are homeschooling. This really is good for everyone. So you might be interested in this. Even if you're not watching it. Anyhow, I'm not in my usual setting. I am on vacation visiting my family in Indianapolis. So I'm at the house of my parents, visiting a bunch of family, and I'm stepping away for a little bit, sitting in their easy chair in the corner, making this video today. So I have a little sketch today about this topic. This is a fantastic topic, and I'm going to go into a lot of depth. So there was somebody named Jory who sent me this email. I'm going to go over the email, and then I'm going to tell you what you want to keep in the back of your head if you are, in fact, homeschooling. So, Jory, thank you so much for your email. I really appreciate this. And here is how the email goes. First of all, I totally understand you're being inundated with email. I get a lot of email, but I have been wanting to address this homeschool topic for a long time, and I think about it a lot, and I have a lot of followers who are homeschoolers. So this stuff is definitely adaptable. So please don't. Okay, blah, blah, blah. I just want to request that you more fully address a topic that I have not found on your site. Could you please address homeschooling? Yes, I don't talk about it very much directly. In homeschooling, it seems executive functioning skills such as organization of papers, deadlines, turning in homework, etc., are far less of a daily necessity. Yet they are so important to the rest of life, and I'm going to address that. That's very true. I'm just wondering if you could suggest or do a blog or a video on how to incorporate more executive functioning skill building into our homeschool. My children are only accountable to me, so often there's a lot of resistance and so little natural consequence to not following through. I know you've mentioned not using motivation or consequences. I'll touch on that. There are consequences to things, and motivation is a thing, but I am saying that I don't try to motivate them, but I'll explain more about that. Therefore, I am often left feeling like I'm powerless to help develop these skills. Homeschooling is a unique situation, not needing the backpack, overhaul, and such. Will you please address this? Thank you for what you do and for your time. Your work is extraordinary. I hope that what I am requesting is clear. It's definitely clear. The only thing that's not clear is how old your children are. What I'm going to say would vary. The details of what I'm going to say would vary for different ages, but the gist of what I'm going to say isn't going to change. So basically, awesome question, Jory. Thank you. Now, what I'm going to do here again is I'm going to take my time on this video, but I'm going to tell you what you want to keep in the back of your head if you're homeschooling. So I don't know what age this is, but all kids, the goal for education is the same. The goal of education, regardless of what country you're in, regardless of what age your children are in, regardless of anything going on with your kids, the goal of education, whether it's homeschool, private school, public school, whatever, the goal of education is the same thing. You want to take this little infant child that you have, this little baby, and you want to give them the tools as they grow to be able to launch a fantastic future. You don't want your child to have a mediocre future or an average future. Ideally, everybody wants their child to be the same thing. And the thing that I hear from parents over and over and over and over is, I just want my kids to be happy and successful. That's what I hear. So then we have to ask, what is happiness and success? That's self-defined, so you can think about that on your own. But we basically want our kids to be happy and successful. So in launching them and educating them, what we want is we want to give them the tools and the skills and the mindsets and the things that are necessary for them to be able to become happy and successful adults while helping them have a fantastic childhood. We want them to be happy and successful as kids and develop the skills so that they can build the type of adult life that they want to have. So, if you're on board with that part of it, then we can now move on. So, we all want the same thing. We want to be happy and successful. We want them to be able to launch a great future. So, why does executive function matter if you're homeschooling? And the reason it is because, as you alluded to in the email, regardless of what your kids want to do, they will have to have good executive function skills in order to navigate any career, dream, or goal that they have in life. Anything that they want to do is going to require a decent amount of executive function. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be good enough. And the families that come to me are coming to me because it's not good enough. Their kids are struggling with execution. They are struggling with the organizational pieces and the prioritization and the time management and all these things. And as you mentioned in the email, they're also struggling with resistance. And if they cannot figure out how to overcome their own resistance, then they will limit their choices and possibilities and opportunities in their own life. So we want to build the executive function skills, and we also want to build the ability to work with their own resistance so that they can do what needs to get done, so that they can achieve their goals. Because regardless of the goal, where they're going to go when they launch, regardless of what they're going to want to do, they are going to have to overcome resistance to certain things that they're going to have to do in order to achieve that goal. So that is huge. So that is why we want to teach executive function skills, even if they're being homeschooled or unschooled. So we want to plant the seeds now. The sooner the better, the younger the better. We want to plant the seeds and plant these seeds of executive function. Now, there's an interesting balance. So one thing that I see, I get a lot of Montessori kids who, for example, struggle with, particularly with writing and math. And one of the things that happens a lot in some schools that are much less structured is that these kids who struggle with executive function really fall through the cracks. And then when there's too much structure, these kids really fall through the cracks, but in other ways. So I'm always, when I'm working with these kids, I'm always playing with this balance. And the balance is, there are a couple of balances, but this one balance in particular is I'm trying to balance structure and freedom. I want to give these kids educationally as much freedom as humanly possible. However, they do need structure. So the kids who struggle with executive function are less structured people by nature. They're not systems oriented people. So they're going to need a lot more structure, and you're going to want to scaffold the structure. In other words, you can't go from 0 to 60 in no time. You have to scaffold structures so that they're learning structure. Kids who are very structured and very systems oriented pick it up really quick. They just understand systems, they understand structures. These kids don't. So we want to give them as much structure, but we want to retain as much freedom. So as a parent, when you're homeschooling, when you're designing curriculum, you want to give as much structure on what's called content, process, and product. Now you can research that on your own. I don't have enough time in this video to go over content, process, and product. But when you're creating and designing curriculum, when you're creating the lessons that you want them to learn, you really want to not just go by the curriculum that you're using for the homeschool curriculum. You really want to think through, why am I doing this? Do I agree with this curriculum? Is it going to be engaging? That word engaging is huge for me. Is it going to be engaging? How can I get more buy-in and ownership? How can I get them more involved in the content they're going to be learning, the process of how they're going to be learning it, and the product of how they're going to show their learning, so that there is more engagement? Ultimately, the more engagement you have, the more engaged in learning, the more they're going to get out of what they're learning. So you want to be balancing, you want to give them freedom because they can choose some of the content, they can choose some of the process, they can choose some of the product, and how they're going to show that. It doesn't have to be how the curriculum tells you to do it. You can really play with those three things a lot. So as a homeschooler, you're going to want to get more buy-in and ownership by altering the content, process, and product to align more powerfully with their interests, their gifts, their talents, their passions, their curiosities, and things like that. Another thing I wanted to mention, so that was the balance between freedom and structure. Another thing I wanted to mention is boundaries. So when you're homeschooling, it's very tough because you're the parent and the teacher, but you do want to help build strong, healthy, clear set boundaries. There are consequences to things. There are natural consequences. You can research on Google natural consequences. That's what you want. What we don't want to be doing when I talk about rewards and punishments and consequences and stuff is they're often misused, and you'll know that a consequence or a reward is misused when it's not working. Okay, so we as adults have consequences to things. We get parking tickets, we get late fees, we lose friendships or relationships or people who were important to us if we do something and we're not executing, we're not prioritizing, and we're impulsive and things like that. There are real consequences for us as adults, um, and we want our children to experience them. We want them to experience real consequences, um, that are aligned with what the thing is. So look up natural consequences. I don't have time to go into that on here. And as far as the motivation is concerned, I don't. What I say is that I don't talk to my students about motivation. I don't try to motivate them. That's not what I try to do, because my belief, what I see, it's not a game that helps me to get them to do what they need to do. What I do is I acknowledge that doesn't seem like something they're interested in, doesn't seem like it's meaningful to them, but it has to be done anyway. So how do we get you to do it anyway? Is what I'm trying to teach them. How do you do it even if you don't feel motivated? That's the question that I ask, and that's the when I'm speaking with them and communicating with them, I'm walking them through that type of process. And mostly the way that we do things that we don't feel like doing as adults or as people who struggle with executing is to chunk it down into bite-sized pieces. It has to be chunked down by time or by task, and I use timers, or I use my daily list, which is in my free program that I give out when you sign up for my blog. So you might refer back to that. But the daily plan is a great way. But these are not easy things. I mean, this is there's no easy way through this. You got to get your kid from where they're at and move them like a millimeter or a fraction of a millimeter forward, and then another millimeter, another millimeter. It's such small steps to get them to be successful. So, okay. So I know that I really am going to be discussing a lot. I'm sorry that this might be going kind of all over the place. So anyhow, I wanted to mention right there a little bit about those boundaries. You do want consequences. You do want boundaries. In my opinion, trying to get them motivated is not the way. Having said that, the more ownership and buy-in that there is, the more quote motivation there will be. Okay, so and sometimes they're going to be very motivated and very interested, but I think more again of that word engagement. I'm thinking engagement. Okay, next. When you're looking at my content and you're looking at my videos and everything, think about, and I'm sure you already do, Jory, and everybody, but think about the principles that I'm teaching behind the specifics of what I'm teaching, because it's the principles that you're going to want to focus on. As opposed to, like, for example, you're not going to be doing the backpack overhaul because you're homeschooling, but the principle behind the backpack overhaul is resetting their school materials on a regular basis so that they're managing them, because otherwise everything's a mess, and they don't and since they're not systems oriented people, they're not learning to manage systems. And what the principle behind the backpack overhaul is to learn to manage the systems that they have to manage. So your children still have to manage papers, books, their sacred study space, maybe an online portal, certainly online research, certainly having Google Docs organized in a way where each subject, they could have a science folder on Google Docs, for example, that has anything and everything they've ever done in science. They could be learning how to give titles to it so that it's easy to see what they created. So, for example, if they looked through Google Docs and they looked at all the documents in the science folder, they would be able to know what each of them was. A lot of these kids just write a title that doesn't mean much, or that's difficult to decipher. I do teach my kids to rewrite the titles and put the date in the title, and what the topic is, so that you can actually know what it is a year later when you've forgotten. So anyhow, okay. So think about whatever I teach you, the principles behind it. Now I'm going to go into several areas and give several examples now of things that you can do as a homeschooler. Again, I want to reiterate ownership and buy-in. Any of the principles that I'm about to mention right now, the more ownership and the more buy-in that you can get, the more your child is a part of choosing how the thing goes and is designed, the more engagement you're going to get. The more they're going to feel a part of it, the more meaningful and purposeful it's going to be. It's not going to be the end all be all fix it or anything, but you want to have more ownership and buy-in rather than you just choosing, hey, we're going to do a math chapter on this and that. You want to say, okay, you've done really well on this math. What do you want to do next? And they may say, I don't know. Then you might say, well, I was thinking either this or this. And then they choose between the two things. There, you've just built in some buy-in and ownership because they've gotten a choice. You could have just said, we're going to do this. But now you're saying, we have 2 units or 2 topics we could cover next. Which one do you want? And then they say what it is, and you say why, and they say what it is. You say, are you sure? They say yes. Now you've got some ownership and buy-in. Again, that doesn't fix everything, but at least you've got a little more engagement. The more it feels like their idea, the more ownership and buy-in there's going to be. So now, everything I'm about to say, you want ownership and buy-in. I just wanted to preface that with this. Now, in an ideal world to me, as an educator, when I'm looking at a child, I don't care if they're in elementary, middle school, high school, or college, and I'm looking at a child and I'm saying, I want them to learn about this. Let's say that I want them to learn how to write a fantastic article where they convey an idea about something that they're interested in. And let's say I'm teaching them how to write an article, for example. Okay, so in an ideal world, I look at all of that as project management. If we're doing a science lab, it's project management. If we're creating a project for a history class, that's project management. The way as an educator that I think about teaching kids and taking them from point A to B, point A, where they don't know much about the content, to point B, where they have pretty good grasp of the content there and they're interested in it. And they like it, So my goal isn't just to teach them. My goal is to get them hooked. I want them to enjoy learning whatever we're learning about. Okay, so in an ideal world, when we're doing these units, I think of them as projects, and I think of the kids as project managers. And the reason that I think like that in my own head is because, and as a homeschooler, you can be thinking of that too, is because you are helping your child to be a project manager. So let's say your child decides they want to go to college and they have to go through the college application process. That is a project that is going to require execution. It's going to require organization. It's going to require time management and responsibility and prioritization. And it's going to require study as they're reading through the research on the colleges and all this stuff. Or organizing folders, organizing their college essays. There's a lot. So as you're homeschooling, these are projects. So think of the units that you're teaching as projects. And your child, in order to manage a project, you want them to have that buy-in and ownership. But in order for them to manage that project, even if they're being homeschooled, they're going to have to plan. So as a homeschool parent, you might plan a math unit for your child. But as you're helping them develop skills of execution, you really want to know that you might sit down with them for a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, just to plan. And even if it feels like you've done no math today or you haven't done enough on that day, a little bit goes a long way. So you may be teaching them how to plan a unit, plan a project, plan a unit of study that you're about to do. And that might not even seem like school, but you sitting down with them planning out the next week or 6 weeks of a project, whatever it is, looking at the calendars, deciding the pieces, chunking it down, that is enormously powerful. You are teaching them how to execute, how to use planning skills, how to develop these skills that don't come naturally to them, that do come naturally to systems-oriented people, but that don't come to them. So when you're planning projects, you're also going to use what I call backwards planning. You're going to say, hey, when do we want this to be due? And your child says, how about in a month? And you say, okay, cool, let's backwards plan from there. Now, again, if your child says in a month and you've asked them, when do we want this due? You've got more buy-in and ownership. They decided when it's going to do. Does that mean it's going to be due that it's going to be done on that date? Of course not. These kids are notoriously unrealistic about the amount of time and energy it takes to do the projects. However, you're not worried about it being perfect. What you're worried about is helping them plan it. And if it doesn't go as planned, helping them, another executive function skill, become more metacognitive, more introspective, more reflective. reflective, more mindful, more conscious, more self-aware. I use all those words interchangeably. If they don't finish it on time, you want them to be more self-aware and say, wow, why didn't we finish it on time? What didn't go right? What could we have done differently? So that's another thing. Now, so again, I'm talking about project management. And one of the things, an executive function with project management is planning. So you're going to help them with the skill of planning. Another thing you're going to help with is priorities. So if you look at my daily plan, I teach them to prioritize. What is the number one thing you're going to do today? I'm not going to get too into depth with this, but basically, as they're managing a project, you are going to walk them through how to prioritize their time. Is it going to work out how they think it will? Oh, I'll spend 30 minutes on this and then I'll be done with it and then I'll have free time. Yeah, right. You're probably not going to be done with it in 30 minutes, but you're helping them develop the skill. Again, I was talking about principles, the skill of prioritizing. They're learning the skill of it. You're helping them organize. Now, as a homeschooler, this is a really great one that you can do, but you get the buy-in and ownership by helping them develop the organizational systems to organize what they're doing. You help them color code. Maybe they color code for each course or content topic, or maybe each project is color coded and has color coded folder. You're going to teach them how to organize an inbox, teach them how to organize their Google documents in their Google folders or their desktop folders so that they're in an organized way. You're going to help them organize real files in a real file box that they're going to need for life. They're going to need a file, like a lot of times I set up older students with files, one called legal, which if they're getting their driver's license, you throw it in that one. If they're getting passport, you throw it in that one, yada, yada. One for financial, their bank account can go in that one if they have a checkbook, whatever. So you can set up files with them so that they're learning how to have a file for things that are actually important in their life. And in their projects with project management, you can teach them how to make checklists where that chunks down the tasks, and that can be used. I know this is a longer video than I usually do, but I just really wanted to go into some depth on this. Anyhow, I'm done apologizing for that. And you can also organize inboxes. So for example, in their sacred study area, you can have different boxes. You can get plastic boxes at a teacher store that are color coded. You might have a red inbox for math. It has their math book or math papers or math projects. You can have a purple one for science, a green one for this, that. So you might have actual physical inboxes for the categories of things they need in school. And they are the ones who manage that, or you're teaching them to manage those. So that's a great way to use executive function. Now, these kids often are not very routine. Now, this is where I was talking about structure and freedom before. Since these kids are not very routine, you have to give them a lot of structure in helping them learn how to develop routines, because if they don't learn that, that's really going to hurt them when they get older. So what you can do with routines is, again, with the buy-in and ownership, say, okay, we're going to develop a routine for bedtime, a routine for wake up, a routine for lunch, a routine for study, a routine for the week, a routine for free time, a routine for whatever. You can print up weekly calendars or monthly calendars or daily routines. You can put routines, print them, post them. You can have them on whiteboards. You can have them with popsicle sticks. You can have them with whatever. But the more visual the routines, the better, and the more they're involved in creating the visual for the routine, the more buy-in they have. They've created it. They now start to understand what it means to have the routine in a much more systematized way. And of course, these do not get perfect overnight, but you start having routines. Use the word routine. What are you doing for your bedtime routine? Did you do this, this, and this? How do we know? Is it visual? Is it easy? And it's a work in progress, but you need to help them with routine. So that's another big executive function thing you want to make very concrete with them. Now, another thing you want to do, I mentioned this before, is set due dates. And again, even if they don't meet the due date, you talk about why, so that they're building metacognition and self-awareness. The more you can have routine times for responsibilities, the better. So if every Sunday they do a half-hour cleanup on the bedroom, and then you can't say to your kid, if it's one of these kids that struggle with executive function, you can't say to your kid, hey, go clean your bedroom, because they literally don't know where to start most of the time. But to say, your job in the next 5 minutes is to clean the floor. Your job is to clean the countertop on your dresser. Your job is to clean under this bed this week. And maybe every Sunday at 2 p.m. it's a whole house cleaning time, and everybody does, a couple chores. Now, let's say that they have to do 50 chores, and you give them a choice of three. Would you rather do this, or this? It's called a false choice. They have to do one of them. It's not that they don't get a choice, but you're limiting it to three so that they can actually think, oh, I'd rather do this. And so, anyhow, having routine times for responsibilities and for dinner and for things as much as you can, the more you can do that and they know that, the better for both of you. I'm very big with these kids on catch-alls. So let's say one catch-all that I often make for these kids is something for electronics. So you have a basket or a bucket or a bin or whatever, and it says electronics on it. If it's, let's say that you find one of their cables in the kitchen, you throw it in the basket, and they say, hey, where's my thing? You say, go, you probably know where it is. Where would I put it? They say, oh, it's in the electronics box. One thing that I do a catch-all for is what goes in the pocket, because these kids are losing their keys, they're losing their money, their wallets, their gift cards. Anything that has to do with what goes in their pocket and they walk out with goes in a basket, so that they can always find their keys, they can always find their cell phone, they can always find their wallet or whatever things they always have on them, their chapstick or gum or whatever it is. So catch-all for things that, for school supplies, just a catch-all. Doesn't have to be organized. It can just be a catch-all. For t-shirts, if these kids don't fold their clothes and you know that, don't make them fold their clothes. Just throw it in a basket called t-shirts, and the only thing that goes in there ever is t-shirts, and maybe it's a certain color. Or they've drawn a picture and stuck it on there that says t-shirts with cool graffiti or whatever. Again, for the buy-in and ownership. Whew. Next one. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. The next one is self-evaluation. So if you're homeschooling, you want to build executive function skills, again, with metacognition and self-reflection, what you want to do, and what I did a lot as a teacher, and I think is very powerful, and I could do a whole hour program just on this, but is how to teach kids to be self-reflective on their work. So they're done with an assignment, let's say, and I often will say, how'd that go? They say whatever. I say, give me a temperature 1 through 10. What would you give yourself on this? And they say a 7. And sometimes I'll say, give me a temperature 1 through 10, but it can't be 7 because everybody likes 7. Anyhow, give me your temperature 1 through 10. They say 7. I say, cool. What would have made this assignment an 8? And they say blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, good. Now, I may or may not have them do that thing, but I'm in this case, I'm trying to build the self-reflection. I want them thinking, what should I have done differently? Maybe I grade it. Maybe it's a 5 out of 10 in reality or something like that. And I say, this was not a 7. It was a 5. Do you want me to tell you why, or do you want to tell me why? And I want them to tell me, because again, I want them reflecting. I want them developing the executive function skill of reflection, because they don't have that. Anyhow, as you are a homeschool parent and you're creating assignments, or you're using assignments from curriculum that you've purchased, you want to think, again, content, process, and product, and how can I not be the one who is grading them, but how can I, and I don't agree with grades, but I do agree with assessment and reflection. But how can I get the ownership and buy-in from them where they're self-grading? Of course, I'm going to help make sure that they're realistic about it, but how can I help them self-grade, self-evaluate? They need that skill, and they need to develop it. It's not just there for these guys. So, and one of my favorite ways to do self-grading is rubrics. So you can create rubrics that look at different metrics that you're going to be looking at, and they're defined with a sentence or two about the thing. So for example, if you're doing a rubric for a writing piece, and one of the things on the rubric is mugs, mechanics, usage, grammar, and spelling, you find a bunch of mistakes on mechanics, usage, grammar, and spelling as you edit it, and you give it a 2 out of 4 on the rubric, they can see there were a lot of mistakes. And then you can say, what could you have done to make it a 3? And they can really think that through and say, oh, well, I could have edited it more. I could have had somebody edit it for me. I could have used Grammarly. I could have looked in Google at the things that were underlined. I could have proofread more carefully. So you can use rubrics. Rubrics are a really good way and to self-grade, but rubrics are also, you can even do that with math. They were done with a math assignment and they do a little rubric. How did I do? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, awesome. I really worked hard. I took my time. I double checked my work. Um, I made it very neat and organized so that I didn't miss the details, because they always do that in math, especially when they get into middle school. They think they can do it all in their head and they can't, because it gets too complex at that point, blah, blah, blah. So you could even do a rubric for how was my effort on my work and what could I have done better and what am I proud of. So I don't always want to just say what could I have done better. I always want to include with that what am I really proud of or what did I do really well. So reflection always has to include the positive too, by the way. So anyhow, as far as self-evaluation, you want them to be building that skill when they're doing their work. Another thing that I mentioned with the catch-alls is homes for things. Where are your keys? Well, they're always hanging on this hook. Where's your math book? Well, it's always in this place or this pile or this area. So homes for things, and using that language is very important because these kids tend to be forgetful and lose things a lot. Finally, I'm going to start wrapping this up. Last thing you want to talk about, that I want to talk about is with executive function, you're helping them work with resistance. And I cannot go too much into this because I could talk forever on this, but you really want to ask them, hey, what do you think the consequence should be if you don't do what you are making a commitment? I use the word commitment a lot. I'll say, okay, so you're telling me you're going to do this. Are you making a commitment? Is that a promise? I'll ask this question a lot. So should I count on you 99% or 100%? And if they say 99%, I say, well, that doesn't sound like a commitment to me. Well, it's okay, but just let's get clear on what you're doing here. If it's 99%, you're not really committing. I do want to hold them to a high standard. I do want to push them outside. This is another zone. I want to push them beyond their comfort zone, but I don't want to push them past the threshold where I lose them. So that's a great line. But I do have a high standard. I do expect a lot from them. I do push them. But I say, what do you think the consequence should be if this doesn't go how you're promising? Okay, what do you think the result should be if it does go, or if you go above and beyond? What would be a good reward for you? Like, I want to get their ownership and buy-in on that too. It's on them. They've made the choice, but they're saying something that matters. And oftentimes, the consequences they come up with are worse than anything I would ever say. So anyhow, working with that resistance is going to be one of the hardest things. And again, if you are making progress in millimeters, you're making progress. So don't give up. Don't get too discouraged. So anyhow, homeschool parents, Jory, I hope that was helpful. That was a lot. I probably should have told you at the beginning to take notes and to pause this video a lot, because I really did pack a lot in there and put a lot of thought into this. It wasn't everything, but hopefully I gave you principles that you can really work with. And know this, yes, you can and should absolutely build in executive function skills. If you look at my article on executive function and you print up the PDF that's on there, in that PDF it lists a bunch of skills. You can stick that up on your refrigerator and refer to that every once in a while, because again, you're going through the principles or the skills. You want to say, okay, I'm teaching this, I'm teaching that, I'm teaching time management, I'm teaching organization. You want to really get familiar with executive function in your own mind, where you're able to say, okay, forget everything Seth says, forget everything anybody says. I have this type of child with this type of personality. They need to learn this skill. What's a creative way I can help them learn this skill? And then think outside the box and try to, or ask them, again, the ownership and buy-in, how do we help you get better at this? I know you're resistant. I know you don't want to. I know you don't feel like it. I know it's not fun, but you are mature enough to know that you need these skills for your whole life. So how do we build this in? And anyhow, with that, again, my name is Seth Perler with SelfEvaluation.com. Go ahead and hit the like button below if you're here on YouTube and leave a comment. And if you're a homeschooler, leave a comment and tell us what ideas you have to help with executive function. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe on my blog, SethPerler.com. I give away some great stuff, and I send you an update every week. And my eyes are officially falling asleep. I'm going to go join my family and have some dinner right now. And I hope you have a fantastic day. And I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Take care.